Good morning, everybody. It is John King, and it is Friday, the 7th of February, and I am coming to you live with a bit of a head cold, a bit of some Dayquil on board, and hopefully everything goes okay during this live stream. So first and foremost, hold on one second here. Let's do that. All right. Sorry, I had an issue on there. All right. So we still should be good. All right. Perfect. So first and foremost, it has been a wild week in the mortgage world and real estate and politics, and all of it is coming together. And so I want to give you an update and keep you updated on what's going on there. So my headline said, Tariffs, Trump, and your home, the housing market's new reality. Well, what does that mean? First of all, it's clickbait. It's designed to help you be right here watching me right now. So what am I talking about? So first of all, what are tariffs and what tariffs are in place and which ones are coming? So tariffs are simply a tax charged by a country for imports. So we can say, hey, China, you are sending us video games, and normally you bring them in and you sell them for X number of dollars. We're going to place a 10% tax on that, so that the federal government's going to keep 10% extra on top of what your cost is. You're going to have to pay us an extra tax for bringing in those goods into the United States and selling them here. So it's really just another tax, but it's a tax that is specifically focused on either all goods that are coming from that country or specific goods that are coming from that country. Now, why do we do that? We do tariffs in order to really same reason why we do taxes: A, to make revenue, and B, to influence decision making, to influence what people are thinking, what they're going to do. So the United States will make more money on the tariff. Well, that's good in some ways, because you're saying, okay, then we have more revenue. We can use that to offset our deficit, and that's good for the economy. But it also means that the consumer, you, are paying more money for that stuff that you're buying. That is not good news. As a matter of fact, that is called inflation. So tariffs can create inflation, but it really comes down to what is the negative to the country that the tariffs are being imposed upon. That country doesn't want to experience those negatives, and therefore they're likely to change their behavior so that the tariffs are not imposed. That is literally what Trump is trying to do. I want to remind you guys, I am not politically on one side or the other. I'm just reporting information as I see it and how it impacts the housing market. Trump successfully, at least in the way I'm about to describe it, successfully navigated the tariff war so far with Canada and Mexico, because he imposed tariffs last Saturday that got lifted on Sunday or Monday. Like, it was a day later that they said, oh, no, we're postponing those tariffs for 30 days. He got concessions. He got those countries to say, I'm going to change something you want me to change in response to not having those tariffs imposed on us. Now, why does China, China, first of all, tariffs were imposed on China. So there's a 10% tariff on all goods that are imported from China right now. And China is retaliating. China is going to impose tariffs on stuff the United States exports to China. That's what's called a trade war. They go back and forth. That is the worst case scenario, that we end up in a trade war where things escalate and escalate and escalate, and we end up being in a position where everything just costs more and nobody's happy. That is not the end game here, but it could be where we end. So what ultimately is happening is, with the three fronts currently in the trade war, we've got Canada and Mexico, that the tariffs are not there. The concessions were granted by those countries. Trump won the first battle of that war. China, we didn't win the battle. China is now fighting back and is imposing tariffs on us. So that one is going a little bit different. We'll see where that one plays out. But here's the deal. I don't think Trump is done. Trump clearly said, I'm just postponing the tariffs on China and on Mexico, and he's going to squeeze them for more concessions, more things. But if the tariffs come through for housing, our biggest concern is Canada, because lumber comes from, a majority of the lumber that we use comes from Canada. Now, the United States has lumber that they can use, and there's a lot of arguments about why we're not using it. I'm not going to go there. The fact is, a lot of the lumber we are using comes from Canada. That will have a very, very specific impact to housing prices. Same as what we had during COVID, when the cost of lumber, the cost of microchips, everything went up. By the way, tariffs from China mean the cost of microchips go up, which means the cost for the chip that goes into your car, the cost for the chip that goes into your microwave, your garage door opener, all of those problems that we experienced back in COVID times, we could potentially run into again. So Trump is definitely walking a very fine line here. Again, successfully with Canada and Mexico, not yet successful with China. We will see whether it succeeds or not. So he's definitely battling. And the question is, what's the outcome of this war going to be? And how's it going to impact housing prices? So we've got a couple other pieces about this, because what happens is tariffs are potentially inflationary. Therefore, people are worried about what's everything going to cost next month or next year. And there's a report that came out this morning from the University of Michigan called the Consumer Sentiment Survey that basically says, what does everybody think is going to happen with the economy? Well, it was very interesting because this morning, for the first time, we saw a huge increase in what everybody thinks inflation is going to be like in a year. Everybody, the people who were surveyed had a much bigger concern about inflation than they've had any time in the recent past. And that is not good news, because if people think inflation is coming, they're going to start acting like inflation is coming. Now, if you know that it's going to cost you more tomorrow to buy milk and eggs, by the way, it already costs way too much to buy eggs, but if you know it's going to cost you more tomorrow to buy milk and eggs, then what are you going to do today? You're going to ask your boss to give you a pay raise, because you need to make more money in order to afford to pay the higher price for the things that you need to buy tomorrow. So tariffs are creating people thinking things are going to cost more in a year. And if they think things are going to cost more in a year, they're going to ask for pay raises between now and when before they even cost more. They're going to prepare for them costing more. And guess what? If you ask your boss for a pay raise and your boss says, man, I don't want to lose this person, you're an amazing employee, I want you to stay, then your boss is going to give you a pay raise, which means your company ultimately has to raise their prices in order to afford to pay you and your colleagues additional money, which means inflation. So expecting inflation is what is called a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we think inflation is happening, we're actually going to create more inflation. That was really bad news this morning, that the inflation, the consumer sentiment says we think inflation is going to be higher next year. And that is something that the markets are very concerned about. That in and of itself can create more inflation. The final piece of all of this is how it's all impacting interest rates, because from an interest rate perspective, the Fed controls short-term rates. The Fed has been lowering short-term rates, and they just stopped lowering short-term interest rates. And what's interesting this last week is that Trump actually came out and said, I think Fed made the right decision by not lowering short-term interest rates, because Trump is focused, as the Fed, really on, hey, we got to worry about how we handle long-term rates. The Federal Reserve does not control mortgage rates or long-term interest rates. And the more the Fed lowered short-term rates, it actually was creating higher long-term rates. We saw it over the last 6 months. We saw mortgage rates at their lows before the Fed started lowering rates. And as the Fed started lowering short-term rates, mortgage rates went up. So there's an opposite tug of war happening right now. And this whole issue about the economy and about inflation and about unemployment and about tariffs all are coming into play. And so this is impacting interest rates, and we're seeing interest rates staying high. And the concern, especially over these inflation and tariff battles, really the tariff battle, is that it's going to lead to short-term inflation. And inflation is bad for mortgage rates. So that's putting upward pressure on mortgage rates. The final piece of all of this is how today's jobs report fits into it. Because today we had the monthly jobs report. It came out this morning at 5:30 Pacific time. And that jobs report showed a bunch of jobs created, 142,000 jobs created. The market expected 171. So that was actually a letdown. That should have been good for mortgage rates. But it actually wasn't good, because the last 3 months of reports were revised. Every month we get a report for this month, but they revised the last 3 months. And those revisions said there were more jobs created than we really thought initially. It's a broken system of how they report this. And I've talked about it before, so I don't want to go in depth in it again. But basically, every month that we get the jobs report, we get this month's guess on how many jobs were created. But then they validate and revise the last 3 months, and they revise those up significantly. So if we really think about this, back in September, the view, as I was talking about, and as if you paid attention, the view was, we've got some problems in employment, and that is going to really, that's what pushed the Fed to say, we are for sure going to start dropping interest rates. Well, every month since then, it's made it clear that we overestimated the problem with employment. The unemployment rate went down, meaning there are fewer people who want a job that don't have one. That says that, hey, if I'm an employer and I want to hire somebody and there's fewer people out there looking for work, then I'm going to have to fight harder to get good employees. Fight harder equals pay them more. And if I have to pay them more, then I have to charge more for the goods and services that I'm selling to afford to pay more for the people that I'm hiring. Now, this is going to be a tug of war over the next couple of years because we have the wild card of AI. And what is AI going to mean to the jobs market? Because you've got the wild card of the president, what he's going to do. You've got the wild card of AI. You've got the wild card on are we going to lose jobs due to AI? Some. Or are we going to become more efficient with the jobs that we have? I think that's going to be more of the truth. I think that a lot of people say, oh my gosh, my job's going to be gone because of AI. But there's going to need to be people who are managing the AI systems. And so you just have to think about your job in a different way. You may not do the task that you did before, but you may be instead working through the computer AI systems, and agents are the next thing that's coming out that is going to be AI actually performing tasks for us. That is going to allow us to be more efficient, which will bring down inflation. It's just like as we, over years and decades and generations, we become more efficient in what we're doing, and it makes everything cost less over time. We are in the middle of an AI revolution, and that is making things cheaper over time. Now, that threatens some people's jobs. And so if you're in that position, you need to start thinking about what can I do to retool my skills so that I can be more valuable in a different way. But it is change, and change is coming from an economic perspective that can lead to short-term unemployment. As companies start transitioning to using AI to handle more and more tasks, there's going to be people who are doing those tasks that are going to be laid off. So that also, from an interest rate perspective, is good news for interest rates. It's my least favorite comparison because it really is finding joy in the misery of others, and that is not what I'm trying to do. But the fact of the matter is, when some people lose their jobs, it is actually good news for the rest of the people who have jobs, who are trying to buy homes or get cheaper payments on their homes, because more unemployment leads to the Fed lowering interest rates. It leads to inflation typically coming down because people don't have money to spend because they don't have the same income. They don't have the jobs that they had before. So all these pieces are tied together, and Trump is the biggest wild card right now. He's come in over the last, what are we at? Two and a half, almost 3 weeks into the job, and he's implemented a lot of change. He's basically upended, and again, I'm not being political here, I'm being factual. He's upended the role of the executive branch. There are three, if you go back to your poli-sci days in school, there are three branches of the federal government. You got the executive, you have the legislative, and you have the Congress, which is the judicial. And it's a balance of power between the three. From everything that I'm reading and seeing, Congress is laying down and playing dead and saying, you know what, I'm afraid to fight against Trump. And some will argue that's great because now you've got action happening, because one of the biggest challenges in our system is inaction, where nobody is doing anything. So we certainly can't say we have inaction right now. Now, you can argue whether we have the right action or not. I'm not saying we do or we don't, but we're taking action. And the question is Trump going to accomplish goals that are truly going to help the government? And he's taking a risk. He is a business person who is taking calculated risks. But the truth is, you can look at it. Trump has had businesses go bankrupt because he took a risk and said, hey, I'm going this direction and I think it's going to work and I'm gambling on it. And he failed. Well, there's a chance that he's basically taken the same risks with the federal government. Now, as a business person, that's a calculated risk. As the leader of the United States, there's some questions about, hey, you have more to lose than just a company that you can go bankrupt and open up another company. So there's a lot of things that are going on here right now. And the tariffs are the newest piece that he's throwing in, that he's not playing around. He's not threatening to do it. He's literally doing it. But it is very clear to me that he's doing it to accomplish the goal of change, accomplish the goal of getting these countries to act differently. The goal is not to have tariffs. But the question is, will we have tariffs as the unintended consequence because those companies aren't willing to give in to a bully? And that's the biggest thing that other countries are saying right now. Look, if you give in to the bully on the schoolyard and he beats you up and says, I want your lunch money, and you give him your lunch money, every day going forward, the bully's going to ask you for your lunch money. And so at some point, somebody's got to stand up to the bully and punch him in the nose. And the question is, Trump is being seen as the bully in the schoolyard to all of these other countries. Well, Canada and Mexico backed down. China didn't. China's punching us back in the nose. And that's going to impact our economy. And the question is it short-term impact or is it long-term impact? And it is not really, it's way too early to know, but I want to be a resource for you to help guide you and help you understand what that looks like. So big picture, interest rates are pretty stable compared to where they were last week, but we were hoping they were coming down. And everybody's hoping that they're coming down. And the fact is that hope is a tough sell right now. So for people who are out shopping for homes, it is definitely a great time to negotiate and get a deal on a home. But I'll tell you, historically, the housing market takes off. By the way, guys, if you have questions, I'm kind of wrapping up here. So if you have questions, feel free to post them. If you're watching live, post it now and I'll pull it up. If you're watching recorded, then I'll post your comment. I'll come back in later and watch it. But historically, the housing market takes off the weekend after Super Bowl. Now, that's a little bit of urban legend, but it's relatively true. And I see it almost year after year. And so we are hoping we're back into a traditional housing market. I am feeling that with the number of my clients that are calling me saying, John, I'm ready to do something. A lot of them had talked to me multiple times over the last 2 or 3 years. And I'm like, okay, well, rates aren't coming down, so I'm going to do something. But then we get on the phone and we talk about the payment. They're like, oh, yeah, I still can't afford that payment. So there's a lot more interest right now in people buying homes. But once they get the reality of the payment again, they're like, oh, yeah, I forgot. I forgot that payment was so high. Okay, so that's the catch-22 right now is we're going to see more interest. I'm already seeing more activity. If those people truly decide I'm going to bite the bullet, I'm going to figure out how to make it happen, I'm going to become a homeowner this spring, good for them and good for all of you who make that decision. But just you want to hope that most of your friends don't make that decision. Because if too many people at the same time right now make that same decision, which I think is a smart decision if you can afford the payment today, it is absolutely a smart decision to buy a home today. As long as you know that you're not going to be moving or relocating in the next 5 years, because we don't know what turbulence we're going to deal with in the next 5 years. So you've got to be prepared. Hey, can I afford this payment for the next 5 years? Am I expecting to need to move or sell my house anytime in the next 5 years? Because you have to be able to say, I can stay here for the next 5 years and I can afford this payment for the next 5 years, even if it's a stretch, because I believe that you're going to be in a much better position in 5 years by becoming a homeowner today. But we are walking a fine line between where we have a good opportunity to buy houses at a good price, or we end up flooding the market with a bunch of buyers and we don't have a bunch of homes listed for sale. And there's not a lot of inventory coming in because of all of the economic issues related to tariffs that they're not giving incentives to builders to build more homes. And so we have a big catch-22 going on right now. We have a very delicate market. It's honestly hard for me to see exactly where we're going to land this spring. I am seeing a lot of interest and activity, which is a good sign. All right, so Lee asked a question. Any updates on Dream for All got moved to number 17 for Inland Empire? As a matter of fact, I do. And I planned on doing a special video next week, but I went through CalHFA's data. It was interesting. I don't have the data in front of me. Basically, fewer people used their vouchers in the first 6 months than I expected. I think 50% of the vouchers actually got redeemed. I think it was like 950 out of the 1,800 vouchers that were issued got redeemed. And way more than the original 1,700 are going to be utilized because the average person is using well less than $150,000. So I see good news for people who are on the wait list. The pull-through percentage of vouchers used of the original vouchers that were issued were close to 50%. And that was way less than what I truly expected. So from that perspective, we've got a lot more vouchers out there, a lot fewer of them being utilized as a percentage than what I expected. I do have some data that I pulled together on regions and what percentage of the vouchers were used in each region. I'm not going to go through that today, but early next week, I'll do a video on that and get it out there to give you some ideas of what we're seeing once I have a chance to analyze that further. So that was a great question. If anybody else has any other questions, feel free to ask them right now. Otherwise, guys, the last thing I want to say, I talked about if you're a home buyer, what you should be thinking right now. If you are a homeowner, you need to be thinking about, you're welcome, by the way, you need to be thinking about home equity and whether you need, now is the time to put it to good use. So I've got some great ideas on, and I've talked to a lot of people out of pulling money out of their home. I've talked to a lot of people into it. So if you're thinking about consolidating debt, if you're thinking about doing home improvements, now is a good time to have that conversation. And so if you are in that position, please reach out to me. You can scan the QR code above or go to the link up above and you can get my contact information. I am absolutely interviewing to be your lender, whether you're purchasing or refinancing a home, or you just know somebody who's looking to purchase or refinance a home. This is my interview and I want to be your lender. Thanks everybody for listening. Hope you have an absolutely wonderful weekend. Hope you enjoy the Super Bowl. I don't really care who wins. I don't know. Because I'm a Niners fan and the Chiefs have beat us too many times, I'm not a Chiefs fan. So my two favorite teams are the 49ers and whoever's playing against the Chiefs. So I guess the truth is go Eagles. All right, guys, have an absolutely wonderful weekend. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.